I've spent far too long going through National Archives documents. But they represent a fascinating counterfactual history to the history that we've been presented in public by our Defence Department for the last 50 to 60 years. The Australian government holds thousands of UFO sightings reports going back decades, many of them once classified secret or top secret. And it might surprise a lot of people to know just how seriously those sightings were taken by military investigators, even though some of those sightings describe crazy things like hovering craft, flying saucers, black triangles. But there's one very secret report which I know exists because I've spoken to someone who saw it being prepared, which isn't in these archives, and it should be. It's perhaps Australia's greatest UFO mystery of all.
Melbourne, in the sunny suburban swinging 60s. What a time to be stuck at school. Westall High School, a college of about 600 pupils in Melbourne's southeast.
I was a very young man in those days. I was teaching a year 9, I think it was, class, teaching science. Just before morning tea, the door flung open, a young girl rushed in.
Mr. Greenwood, there's a flying saucer!
Mr. Greenwood, there's a flying saucer.
The bell went, and I can remember running out into the oval, looking into the sky, and seeing these things, and just standing there absolutely transfixed.
When I looked up, I could see this object in the sky. It was directly over the far side of the oval.
Never seen anything like it before in my life, haven't seen anything like it since. Trying to absorb what we were looking at because it was just something so unusual.
It was your classic cigar-shaped object that looked like grey metal. That's what it looked like.
We got some of the key witnesses to quietly, independently draw what they saw, and they drew clear, consistent images of the same sort of object. What I want you all to do is to try and draw as best as you can what you saw that day. And no peeking.
The movement was incredible. Straight up, side, up, down, all over the place.
Was that
It's sort of like a hump on the top. It's like a silvery thing, like this, and it had like little lights around it. All lights underneath it around here, around the edges.
Very interesting that all of you are describing roughly the same
There you go.
shape
There you go.
of object.
There
I
you
mean,
go.
that's amazing. I mean, you all give a clear and fairly consistent account of a classic flying saucer.
It was a grey, almost cylindrical or cigar-shaped object which moved with some degree of precision in the sky.
Flying saucer?
I'm not going to say flying saucer, that's emotive language. But it was of the shape that you would see if you had a saucer slightly tipped on its side.
What's amazing about the Westall story is that it's as if it never happened. It's effectively being wiped from history. And yet, just down the road from this suburban RSL, 55 years ago, students, teachers, local residents looked up into the sky and saw what can only be described as a UFO, a flying saucer. And those people, those witnesses, are as sure today as they were 55 years ago about what they saw. Aren't you guys? Yes! At this time, as you're watching this, what's the reaction from the kids?
Lots of oohs and ahs. There's a significant number that then took off over the oval because it had moved, flown down apparently behind some pine trees.
I actually headed over to the corner of the school and jumped the fence and went into a place called the Grange, which is an area where we used to do our cross-country exercises, and ran towards where we had seen one appear to come down and land.
You actually saw one of the objects land?
Yes. Well, I didn't see it land, but I did see it on the ground in front of me. I could feel a heat and hear this buzzing sound, and I could see purple lights all around it. I no sooner got there, and within, I'd say, a minute, it just raised up off the ground really slowly, just kept on rising to probably about 3 or 4 metres, maybe a bit higher, and then it turned on its side and just almost just disappeared, just went straight up like that, and I looked up in the sky and I could see the other two. So it appeared to just disappear.
This is first-person evidence from people saying, I saw a craft, a mechanical object, intelligently controlled, hovering above me. That's good evidence. I think that's evidence that deserves to be taken seriously.
Within 40 minutes of the sighting, Air Force and Army personnel, look in their trucks. They were there.
You saw this?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Military turned up for sure. You're very sure about that?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
And exactly what did you see? Men in uniform?
Yes, yeah, I saw, yeah, and they actually, they had, like, it was like sentry guards at their different points, stopping people from going into the Grange. But you've got to remember, that was our backyard. If we wanted to get in there, we could. Yeah.
And did you sneak in?
Oh, later on, yes, I did.
And what did you see?
The circular area, like, the trampled grass, and there were guards around it, and there were people in there with equipment.
What do you say to the fact that officially there is no government report into this matter?
Well, because they buried it, you know, they hid it.
14 days later, Mr. Greenwood was paid a visit to his home by 2 men on official government business.
2 weeks later, a knock on the door, and when I answered it, there were 2 people there, one in plain clothes and the other one senior Air Force. Obviously senior, had a good many rings on his sleeve, and they told me that I was wrong, that I hadn't seen anything. And when I tried to explain to them that they weren't there, I was, and I knew what I saw. And well, I think the first suggestion was that you'd be ill-advised to go on saying that, because clearly you were drunk on duty, and that will have to be reported to the Education Department, and of course you'll lose your job.
They were threatening you?
Oh, absolutely. I was threatened.
You're describing officials from our government trying to gag you from telling the truth about what you saw.
Which is quite interesting when you realise that officials from another government 12 months later begged me to speak about it. The office of the President saying...
Let's be clear here, this is the President of the United States.
Yes, the President of the United States.
President of the United States.
The President had authorised the establishment of a board of inquiry, or an inquiry, to inquire into issues of unidentified flying objects, and that they were sending out somebody who I believe turned out to be Mr...
I think it might have been a Professor James McDonald.
James McDonald, that's the one.
Officially, he was working for the US Navy, but in his spare time he's checking many Australian reports of UFOs and comparing them with American reports. His aim is to see if the reports tally, in short, whether UFOs constitute a global phenomenon. In Melbourne, he's talking with Brian King.
Mr. McDonald, what have you found here that's been of use to you?
I've investigated about 50 or 60 cases since I came down to New Zealand and Australia. Extremely interesting UFO sightings, essentially similar to those in the United States.
What are the main similarities?
persons of really quite high credibility reporting unconventional objects, discs, cigar-shaped objects, frequently at very low elevation, hovering over sometimes urban areas, sometimes over cars, following cars.
I met this Professor MacDonald. Basically, we did the same as I'm doing with you now. I just went through the story.
And did he treat you respectfully?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Here, there is a recording of the interview.
You saw it. There was hovering motionless when you saw
well, it did several things. It did hover at different times. It seemed to be able to accelerate and disappear out of sight, and then someone would see it over in another part of the sky. It moved considerable distance very rapidly, and then it would move back again.
My recollection is that it was very much, he asked some prompting questions, and that's all. It was basically for me to speak.
And why did it disappear?
Well, this is one thing we just don't know. It vanished.
All of a sudden, while you were all looking at it?
No, it did one of these, accelerations, and nobody could pick it up again. It's gone.
There clearly is a report somewhere.
What really strikes me is that 55 years on, these people are very certain about what they saw. And it just begs belief to me that in Australia, we've never had any official investigation. And flatly, I think there's been a cover-up. I really do. I think somebody has buried the Department of Supply report, which I know exists.
This is the largest group sighting of a UFO. This is the largest one in the Southern Hemisphere. And it's got to hold credibility because it's not as if just one person saw it. There were over 200 people saw it.
But there's one thing you are very sure of. Somebody was trying to cover the sun.
Oh, yes. And that is what I find most interesting of all. That I was definitely being told to be quiet.
America has recovered alien extraterrestrial technology, including spacecraft. How many, I can't believe I'm saying this, aliens are on board this craft?
16.
16 aliens.